Okay, I guess it's time to begin. Well, welcome everyone. Um, this is the seventh webinar of the Psychology of Wellbeing course. And today what we're going to be doing is um, we'll be talking about life domains and their effects on happiness. We started this topic, which is essentially Module 4, Webinar 7. And again, we're focusing on chapter 16 to 23. We already talked about the psychology related to domain dynamics to essentially get this part of the book or part of the module started. And we talked about work well-being, and we finished that topic. So we talked about the research dealing with that. Today, what we're going to do is we will continue to talk about different types of domain well-being or domain satisfaction. And so as you can see from this slide, we already talked about the domain dynamics, as you see from the cursor on the left-hand side. And then we finished discussing the research related to work well-being. So what we're going to do today is we're going to concentrate on residential well-being, material, or what we call economic well-being, social, family, and marital well-being, health well-being, leisure well-being. And I want to try and be selective in terms of covering some of those topics or some of the...
Joe, excuse me, Joe?
Yes?
Excuse me, there's no screen. We don't see the slides.
I thought I got that one started. How about now?
Perfect.
Well, thanks for the alert.
That's okay.
We would have gone for a while without necessarily any slide. And that may not be necessarily all that optimal. Great. So again, based on the slides, we talked about the psychology related to the domain dynamics and the theories dealing with the sort of what you call the interplay between and among the different life domains. And we finished discussing the research related to work well-being. Today, what we're going to do is we'll concentrate on residential well-being, material, or what you might call economic well-being, social, family, and marital well-being, health well-being, and leisure well-being. So again, there are plenty of things to talk about. And I'm going to try and be selective in the coverage of those topics because, again, there's so much to talk about. So let's start out with, so this is what we did so far. And here we will start with residential well-being. Now, what is residential well-being? There are three aspects or three major dimensions related to residential well-being. I'm going to try to expand the screen so I can see you all. There you go. So what are we talking about in terms of residential well-being? Residential well-being, as I mentioned, involves three dimensions. So we're talking about a dimension related to housing, another dimension related to the neighborhood, and the third dimension is related to the community at large. So let's say if a person is living in a town or a city, then we're talking about, in essence, residential well-being from that perspective. So we're talking about housing, neighborhood, as well as community at large. So it covers a large gamut, a spectrum of studies dealing with what we call residential well-being. Now, there are so many definitions related to residential well-being, and as I mentioned, I'm going to try and be very selective in the way we cover those topics. Yeah, for the sake of time. Now, by now, you probably feel a little bit more comfortable with bottom-up theory, bottom-up spillover theory of life satisfaction. That seems to be sort of the guiding, or maybe a major theory that guides much of the research on a whole bunch of topics related to well-being. And from that perspective, at least from my vantage point, I'd like to think of residential well-being in terms of satisfaction with a domain. And in that domain, it is, in essence, residential life, right? So we're talking about home life. We're talking about neighborhood life. We're talking about community life. So a general feeling, a general evaluation. So if I were to ask you, how do you feel about the city or the town that you're living in, on a scale from very dissatisfied to highly satisfied? And you say, yeah, I'm very satisfied with where with the community that I'm living in. So an overall global rating of satisfaction related to, again, whether it's the house that you're living in, or what you call an apartment or flat or what have you, or the neighborhood, sort of the immediate surrounding associated with that residence, as well as the community at large. So it could be a town or a city, or possibly a province or a county. So that general global feeling of satisfaction, I think, is a good definition based on bottom-up theory, in the way that satisfaction within that domain spills over onto life satisfaction. So as you can see from the slide, the residents' feelings of gratification from living in a specific place, that would cover that definition that I'm talking about. Residents' feelings of satisfaction with the community at large, that's the fourth bullet. And then we have things like the rest of the definition, and for example, this definition, residents' perception, evaluation, satisfaction with community amenities, services, and condition. If you have the book open, you can go to page 414 and table 18.1. And here we're talking about a definition of residential well-being that focuses on perception and evaluation of the environment, dealing with green spaces, urban cleanliness, pollution as in air, water, noise pollution, urbanism, aspects related to urbanism, like occupation density, and urban and tectonic quality, if I'm pronouncing it right, mobility issues like traffic and public transportation, issues related to cultures such as cultural facilities and cultural recreation, sports and leisure, recreational and leisure spaces, sports facilities, all the way down to things like urban safety, crime and urban insecurity, poverty and exclusion, social and civic behavior. All of these are evaluated in the context of a given geographic unit. So what researchers have done is they say, okay, well, the definition of something like residential well-being is nothing more than a composite of evaluations related to all of those, what you call dimensions. This is where it gets a little confusing. And the reason why I say it's confusing is because are we talking about antecedents, or what you call predictors of residential well-being, or the definition of residential well-being per se? In my mind, when you come up with a composite of dimensions that captures residential well-being, or other kinds of well-being concepts for that matter, it gets a little confusing in terms of what is the actual construct versus what are those antecedents or determinants of that construct. And many of those composite indices tend to get a little confounded. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. Confounded with the actual definition. So I'd rather, talk about, for example, those perceptions and evaluations of all these dimensions, like, evaluation of the environment, such as green spaces and urban cleanliness, all the way to recreational and leisure spaces, sports facilities, and poverty and exclusion in a given geographic unit. These can be construed as antecedents or determinants, or what you might call predictors, right, of residential well-being, rather than the definition of well-being per se. So, for simplicity purposes, we can talk about residential well-being as satisfaction with housing, satisfaction with neighborhood, satisfaction with the community at large. That's a good way to actually understand and try and untangle the actual definition of the construct of residential well-being from its antecedents or predictors, right? So let's move on to talk about how does residential well-being contribute to life satisfaction. And as we mentioned and discussed previously, bottom-up spillover theory seems to be the best theory that capture how feeling satisfaction with housing, satisfaction with the neighborhood, satisfaction with the community at large tends to impact, tends to influence the life satisfaction judgment. And it does that through, again, a spillover, a bottom-up spillover, in which there are some very specific life events at the very bottom of the pyramid related to housing, related to the neighborhood, related to the community, and the positive and negative affect related to these life events tend to spill over vertically, meaning from bottom to up, to influence satisfaction with overall satisfaction with housing, overall satisfaction with neighborhood and community, and that domain satisfaction influences life satisfaction at large. So it's a bottom-up spillover, as we previously discussed.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, Mike. Good to see you. We have a new guest, Professor Michael Frisch, who is an expert on quality of life therapy. He's written several books on that, and there it is, one of his books. Yes, thank you, Mike, for being with us and being part of this.
I'm sorry, I didn't have the right time.
Well, now you do. Great. Okay, so we're going to move on to talk about some of the predictors. You remember I was trying to make a distinction between those composite indices of residential well-being in which it gets, they get confounded with the predictors. And these are the predictors that we're talking about. Like, for example, satisfaction with business, government, and nonprofit services as institutional factors. Well, in some cases, we develop a composite index of residential well-being based on satisfaction with business, all the businesses in the community, all the government services in the community, all the nonprofit services in the community. And we come up with that composite index, and that becomes residential well-being. Well, in essence, these are predictors of the global judgment of satisfaction of housing, of neighborhood, of community at large. So when we're talking about satisfaction with businesses, we're talking about things, whether you're satisfied with shopping mall in your area, whether you're satisfied with banking or with real estate, with all of the business enterprises that are in your community. The same thing with government services, from street lights to roads, to bridges, to you name it, and all the services that the government provide to the residents of the community. And nonprofit services, of course, I think in terms of nonprofit, there's so many nonprofit services in the community. Educational, in the educational sector would be a whole bunch of schools. Most schools tend to be sort of nonprofit services. And therefore satisfaction with these tend to impact the global satisfaction, satisfaction judgment with the community at large. Public expenditures on public safety is definitely another major factor that impacts the overall judgment. How do you feel about your community at large? Well, whether the local government is spending enough money on, for example, law enforcement, that would be another major factor. Social factors, things like safety and crime, what's the crime rate in the community? Now, of course, that affects the overall judgment of satisfaction with the community at large. Race relations. In the United States, we have a problem with race relations, between different minorities, in relation to different minorities such as African American and Native Americans and Latinos. So the extent to which one is satisfied with race relations in the community makes a difference in affecting the overall judgment of how satisfied they are with the community at large. Satisfaction with family and trends in the area. A lot of people feel satisfied with the community or the neighborhood if they have family and involved in the community. Because of course, social, as we previously discussed, we are as a species, as social animals, we are hypersocial, and therefore having family and friends within the community makes quite a difference in terms of our own feelings of satisfaction with the community at large. Community involvement, the extent to which we're allowed, we are involved in community affairs and feeling feeling community pride, feeling that there is a sense of community solidarity, feeling pride and commitment in one's community makes quite a difference in terms of the overall satisfaction with housing, neighborhood, and community, what you call residential well-being. Environmental factors, again, pollution, air pollution, noise pollution, water pollution. And again, these are factors that are very important in affecting our judgment of satisfaction with the community at large. Dilapidated structures, access to public transportation, parks and green spaces, or the aesthetic quality of the community at large. All of these are what you might call environmental factors that many studies have documented, have demonstrated their effect on residential well-being and ultimately on life satisfaction. Economic resources as the cost of living. Cost of living is definitely an important factor. If you live in a city in which the cost of living is very high, then that sort of takes away and detracts from your satisfaction with the community at large. Now, this is an interesting factor: homogeneity in income of household in the same neighborhood. Studies have shown that if you live in a neighborhood in which you've got quite a bit of what you might call income variation, so the people next door are making too much, making too much money compared to how much you're making, that kind of leads to social comparison. So you feel like you don't measure up, in terms of wealth. And therefore, if your neighbor is making as much money as you are, that kind of dampens any kind of social comparison that you make in terms of what you call an upward comparison. And therefore, you don't feel bad about yourself. And that judgment, that social comparison, makes a difference. And in terms of its influence on what you call residential well-being. Kind of an interesting study when I first read it. Home ownership, the extent to which you own your home, or your flat, your apartment, or what have you, that makes a difference. It gives you a sense of community involvement. You have a stake in the community, in the neighborhood, and therefore that feeds into your satisfaction with the community and the neighborhood and the like. We have geographic factors, as in location and size of the city. Let's say focus on the size of the city. There is research that documents that if you live in a very large city, that sort of takes away from residential well-being. People who live in smaller cities, as in towns, tend to feel a lot more satisfied with their community than those people that live in big cities like New York or Paris or London, very big cities, or Calcutta, India, on and on, right? So smaller cities tend to make a contribution to residential well-being than big cities. Location, well, there are some studies, especially in Europe, that suggested the location of the community where it's at geographically. Like, for example, if the community is located in northern and or Western Europe, people are feeling a lot happier with their community than if those communities are located, for example, in Eastern Europe and Eastern and Southern Europe. So that study, I guess that's sort of interesting. I don't even comment about that. I thought it would be strange because there's so many confounding factors. And I'm not sure whether they were able to co-vary out all the other factors that may have affected this residential judgment. Okay, well, we have two questions before we move on. Could you please share the screen? Okay, we've done that. when we operational definition the predictors of residential well-being, should we still use satisfaction of yeah, because there are so many satisfaction of certain amenities, certain conditions, certain services. So again, these are micro dimensions, and satisfaction with those, what you might call micro dimensions, affect the global satisfaction judgment of the community at large or of the neighborhood. So yes, indeed. Do you feel comfortable with that?
Can I ask another observation?
Yes.
Yeah, because when we define the well-being as a dependent variable, we use the term satisfaction. So when we have a predictor of the satisfaction,
Right.
so we still have satisfaction to explain satisfaction.
Yeah,
That's
yes.
my question.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no problem with that because, the dependent variable, in this case, in terms of residential well-being, is how satisfied you are with your community at large. So it's much more macro. And then the predictor would be, how satisfied are you with the crime in the community? Crime is a very specific dimension, and satisfaction with that very micro dimension affects the global satisfaction with the community at large. So yes, it becomes a predictor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's move on to talk about economic well-being or material well-being. Same thing. We use these two terms interchangeably. So let's try and define the construct, and then talk about theories related to economic or material well-being in terms of how it contributes to life satisfaction. And then we talk about the predictors or the antecedents, or sometimes we talk about them as determinants. I like to use the word predictor because we're social scientists, social and behavioral scientists, and it's very difficult to prove causation. So, in the natural hard sciences, it's easy to talk about determinants, a cause. One thing causes another, and that becomes a determinant. But in the social sciences, sometimes it's very hard to prove causation. So we talk about predictors that, as a way to talk about how one thing influences another, because statistically speaking, that's probably the best you can do. Okay. So what is material or economic well-being? There are so many definitions of economic well-being. I'm going to select one definition, and I hope you feel comfortable with that definition. And that is evaluation of one's standard of living. That's the second bullet. Can you see the second bullet? Evaluation of one's standard. I feel most comfortable with that definition. So if you say, how do you feel, or how satisfied are you with your standard of living? And then you qualify standard of living by saying what it means. What is standard of living? Standard of living involves three dimensions, three economic dimensions. One is income, how satisfied you are with your income. The second dimension is savings, savings and investments. So besides your income, how much you are satisfied the money that you saved and you've invested. And the third one would be assets in terms of what you call material possessions. So the furniture that you have, the automobile that you own, and if you own a boat or whatever other assets or material things, what you call material possessions, again, that is part of the definition of standard of living. So how you feel about these three dimensions of standard of living make up the definition of economic or material well-being. So let's just focus on that definition, although I have to acknowledge there's so many other definitions. And of course, in the book, I get into all of these other definitions, right? So if you're interested in understanding these other definitions and the measures related to these other definitions, read the chapter. Okay. Let's talk about how material or economic well-being influences life satisfaction. And it's very obvious. We already talked about bottom-up spillover theory. So there are so many life events that impact those three dimensions related to income, related to savings and investments, and related to material possessions, right? There's so many life events, whether it's shopping or ownership of these things, an experience related to those, to your job, for example, too, in the way your job produces income. And these feelings, these emotions, these satisfaction related to these life events, they travel up, they trickle up to influence the overall judgment of how you feel about your standard of living, right? That's a domain, right? We call it the economic life or financial life or material life. These are terms that are interchangeable. And how we feel about this life domain impacts life satisfaction at large. That's a bottom up, right? So also talked about top down, and that is if you feel happy, if you feel satisfied with your life, it's very likely that that judgment of life satisfaction will influence the judgment about how you feel about your standard of living. So if you feel happy with life at large, then it's very likely, it will influence your judgment about your cost of living. I'm happy with life. I'm happy with not the cost of living. What am I saying? With the standard of living, right? With my standard of living. That's top-down spillover theory. Self-determination theory, again, we talked about that in a previous context. It involves the extent to which, people have three needs, basic psychological needs: the need for autonomy, the need for competence, and the need for relatedness. And the extent to which these needs are satisfied through income, savings and investments, and again, material possessions. So the theory says that those, having income, having higher income or greater income, more savings and investment, more material possession, gives you a sense of competence. It meets, it satisfies the need for competence. It satisfies the need for relatedness, in the sense that through your income and savings and material possession, it broadens your social network. People get to your social network expands as a function of your wealth. And yes, there is evidence to suggest that. The same thing with autonomy. Wealth gives you a sense of autonomy. You can do things that you cannot do if you don't have the money, so to speak. You can travel, for example, that gives you a little bit more autonomy to do things. You can, if you don't like your job, you can say, take this job and shove it, right? That gives you a sense of autonomy. So again, that self-determination theory helps explain how financial well-being, material well-being, or what you call economic well-being impacts life satisfaction. Cognitive association theory is nothing more than there is a lot of people tend to make cognitive associations between wealth and success in life and life satisfaction. So people, tend to make attributions and they say, if I am wealthy, then I must be happy in life because there is an association there. And as a matter of fact, in our culture, these associations are very prominent. They're very strong. So in many democracies and pro-market types of societies, again, these cognitive associations between wealth and happiness tends to dominate our culture. And that's the gist of what we call cognitive association theory. So what are the predictors of material or economic well-being? Socioeconomic demographics. There's a whole bunch of these. So if, demographics, if we're talking about something like marital status, married couples, something to do with their assets and their combined income, they're better off. They tend to have higher levels of economic well-being than those people who are widowed or those people who are single, people who are divorced. So, there is quite a bit of evidence to suggest that. How about something like gender, like sex? Whether there are differences between men and women. Actually, much of the research found no difference between men and women in relation to economic well-being. So there's no relationship there. But when it comes to something like education, well, there is definitely a positive relationship between education and economic well-being. Those people who are more educated tend to feel a greater sense of material or economic well-being than those people who are less educated. And that's pretty obvious. The educated people tend to have more skills that would allow them to make more money, right? That kind of thing. So there are other kinds of socioeconomic demographics that a lot of studies have focused on, and many of those seem to be pretty obvious. Well, let's focus on personality traits. Well, there are two personality traits that have been documented in the research on well-being that showed a clear connection, a clear link between personality and economic well-being. As you can guess, neuroticism and extroversion. So let's try and explain that. Neuroticism and extroversion. Now, people who are neurotic tend to express lower sense of material well-being than those people who are not neurotic. Why? The explanation, again, can be pretty obvious. People high on neuroticism tend to see a lot of things in a negative way. They have a very different negative frame of mind. They tend to be optimistic. They tend to be contrarian. they have a negative outlook on life, and therefore all of that kind of spills over in the what you might call the work arena. So a neurotic person is not likely to do well on his or her job, and therefore, in terms of work, they're likely to be less successful and therefore be able to generate less income, right? Extroverts, on the other hand, tend to, because of their personality, they tend to be much more sociable. They tend to be much more collegial, at work, allowing them to establish positive relationships at work, and therefore that helps them with promotion and salary raises. And of course, that because that personality trait influences their work performance, generating greater income, higher income because of that, then that kind of spills over into satisfaction with material life. So that's the impact of personality traits on material well-being. Goals and aspirations. Now, some people have higher goals than others. Some people aspire to maybe strive from a working class to a sort of what you might call an upper class, or maybe a upper middle class. Okay, I want to make more money for my family, for me, so that we'd be able to live a happier life. For those people who have these goals and they strive to achieve those goals, they are likely to have higher sense of material well-being that spills over on life satisfaction than those people who have what you might call dampened aspirations. Some people live their lives with no monetary or financial aspiration. I don't want to make more money. I'm just happy the way I am. Take, for example, people who are literally raised in a caste, like in India. Are you familiar with the untouchables? They are the lower caste of society. Okay, for those people, they don't have any ambitions. They says, I am born like this. I will live my life like this. I can't change my destiny. I cannot make more money and help my family because that's the way it is, right? They don't have any goals and aspirations because they feel that they are stuck in their caste, right? Within the caste system. So that, of course, impacts, they're not happy with their material condition, with their financial conditions, and therefore, right, they're not likely to be happy with life because material satisfaction impacts life satisfaction through a bottom-up spillover. Although there are a whole bunch of other confounds, like, for example, a compensatory mechanism in place. A person who is not happy with material life can guard against any kind of dissatisfaction with life at large by compensating. Remember, we talked about compensation theory and the way they channel much of their energies into another life domain that gives them satisfaction, that ultimately gives them a semblance of satisfaction with life or well-being overall. Like, for example, spiritual life. They become more religious, right? And they spend so much time and energy on religious activities. Well, that's a way to compensate. But nevertheless, there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that satisfaction with financial and monetary conditions in life tends to impact life satisfaction and overall subjective well-being. Skills, behaviors, and resources. Here we're talking about financial skills. You know, some people tend to have a lot more skills, financial skills than others. Some people can plan financially. They can plan to save their money. They plan to, you know, for retirement purposes. These are skills. And we talk about financial literacy as a skill that is acquired. And for those people who have that higher skills are likely to do better financially speaking, ultimately generate satisfaction in economic life, which spills over to life satisfaction. Behaviors, for example, when a person gets in debt, right? You know, overspends. You talk about shopaholics. You know, they spend their money unwisely, buying things that they don't need, right? And they get in debt. Well, that's a behavior that ultimately leads to one's financial demise, for example, right? Or you could be very frugal. You're frugal in the sense that you can save your money and you can watch how you spend. That's a behavior. That's a financial behavior that ultimately leads to a greater sense of financial well-being. Same thing with resources. How much financial resources you have ultimately leads to, if you have more resources, it leads to satisfaction in your financial life. So that's as far as skills, behaviors, and resources. Materialism is another personal factor, and there's quite a bit of research. As a matter of fact, I and my colleagues have done quite a bit of research on that. And I think we alluded to this kind of research in the past, in the previous webinar. And one of the things that stood out is that when it comes to materialism, the early research on materialism has shown a negative correlation between those people who are materialistic and life satisfaction or other measures of well-being. So there's a negative relationship between these two constructs. But now some of the newer research, especially the ones that I've done with my colleagues, have shown that when it comes to materialism, it's a double-edged sword. A double-edged sword. What does that mean? That means there is a dimension of materialism. If you are materialistic, you know, being materialistic can lead to success, can makes you motivated to achieve more in terms of making more money, doing better on your job, doing better on your saving and investments, acquiring those material possessions that would signal your status in life. That particular dimension of materialism helps, you know, generate greater life satisfaction. But there is another dimension of materialism that we call it happiness materialism, and that is, you know, you're only happy if you're spending money and acquiring material things. And you tend to overdo it with material possession to the point where, again, that particular dimension of materialism makes it worse on you. And therefore, ultimately, from a financial point of view, it takes you down. It takes away from your financial well-being, and ultimately it detracts from your subjective well-being overall. So it's a double-edged sword. There's one positive dimension of material, there's another negative dimension, and one needs to, again, take into account these two dimensions of materialism in order to fully account of its influence on financial well-being or economic well-being. Then we have contextual factors, and there's quite a bit of research in this area dealing with social comparison. A lot of people tend to feel very happy or unhappy about their financial condition, their financial status, as a function of who they compare their financial status with. So if they compare themselves upward, they live, like we remember in terms of residential, they live in a neighborhood in which their neighbors tend to make a whole lot more money than they do. That's an upward social comparison. If they make those social comparisons a lot more frequently, then they're likely to detract from their economic well-being, which again negatively detracts from life satisfaction. But on the other hand, if you make downward comparison, if you're making enough money and then you compare yourself with the poor, for example, well, that gives you a sense of well-being, which spills over to life satisfaction. That's social comparison. Quite a bit of research on income and the effect of income on life satisfaction and other dimensions of subjectivity. And as a matter of fact, remember what we talked about, the Easterlin paradox? Easterlin paradox, yes. And that is, the more money you make, the flatter your happiness. Happiness does not necessarily rise to the point where it corresponds with increases in your income. And that actually the adaptation effect, which is the next item, is much more pertinent to the Easterlin paradox than social comparison. And the adaptation effect is that as you make more money, you adapt your expectations, your lifestyle, and your expectations of your lifestyle changes to accommodate your making more money. And therefore, if your expectation rises with your income, then you don't get a sort of what you call a satisfaction effect. You have to make more money than you expect in order to get this boost in satisfaction, boost in positive emotion. So the adaptation effect accounts for that. Finally, you have changes in the macroeconomic environment. And, for example, when people go through a recession, an economic recession, do they suffer? Do their well-being suffer? And the answer, yes, there is evidence to suggest that, changes in the economic conditions of society tends to affect one's financial well-being, sense of financial well-being, which again spills over onto life satisfaction, i.e. in this case, dissatisfaction. And if the economy is doing well and everything is going well, yes, again, that affects your overall sense of economic well-being, which transfers over to life satisfaction. So yes, changes in the macro environment tends to affect overall the material and economic sense of well-being, which affects overall well-being. Okay, now let's take a 10-minute break before we come back and talk about social, family, and marital well-being. No questions in the chat box. Okay, I'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay. Okay, we're back. drink a little bit of my chai tea. Okay, this is an interesting topic. You'll probably find it more interesting than some of the other topics. Social, family, and marital well-being. In reality, in terms of the research in well-being, we probably need to distinguish between social life, family life, and marital life. And in marital life, there's quite a bit of overlap between what you call marital life, meaning the life between spouses, you know, husband, wife, or girlfriend, boyfriend kind of thing. Or, you know, could be love life. That would be another. And so, you know, some of the research is sort of segmented accordingly. So we need to, again, try and figure out what those constructs are in terms of research, how they're measured, how does social, family, and marital well-being contribute to life satisfaction, and then, again, what are those predictors? As I mentioned, there are so many definitions of these constructs, so many definitions, and so many metrics, measures. The one that I like to work with the most, which is grounded and bottom up, you know, theory of life satisfaction, is satisfaction with social life, satisfaction with family life, satisfaction with marital life. You know, if you ask a person in general, without being very specific, you know, in general, how satisfied are you with your love life? How satisfied are you with your family life? How satisfied are you with your social life? These are questions that people can relate to. And yes, in their own mind, things are a little segmented and they can answer very clearly with no difficulty, right? In terms of what there's, you know, how they feel about their family life, their social life, their love life, right? So again, I prefer, see this, the first bullet in the first bullet in that slide, satisfaction with social life. You know, you can actually replicate that with, you know, satisfaction with love life, satisfaction with family life, same thing. Now it gets a little convoluted. Remember the comment that I made in terms of, you know, there are a lot of researchers out there that they use composite indices, and composite indices tend to convolute, they tend to confound the predictors with the actual construct. So let's say when we're talking about something like social adjustment, well, social adjustments talks about, you know, how people become adjusted in a social context, how they fit in the group, how they contribute to the group, how they feel a sense of solidarity, a sense of camaraderie, a sense of cohesion with the group, right? These can be construed as predictors, as antecedents or determinants to how people feel about their social life in general. So what's the antecedent versus what's the construct itself? Because, you know, there's quite a bit of research on determinants, or what you call antecedents or predictors, right, of the behavioral phenomena that we're investigating. So I'd rather look at the definition of social well-being, marital well-being, and family well-being as a global judgment of satisfaction in those domains. We call them domain satisfaction. So I'm going to leave it at that. If you're interested in in understanding those other definitions and the metrics associated with those definitions, please help yourself by reading the book. Now, let's try and explain how social well-being, marital well-being, and family well-being impact life satisfaction or subjective well-being. And there are so many theories, as you can see from the slide. The need to belong, attachment theory, the buffering effect of family, bottom-up spillover, horizontal spillover, compensation, mattering. We'll talk about that. The triangular theory of love and the passionate versus companionate love. Interesting. So let's talk about some of those theories. The need to belong. The need to belong is so fundamental in as part of human nature. So fundamental, so foundational. We need to belong to groups. We need to belong to our families. We need to belong to our communities. We need to belong to our countries. We feel a strong need to belong. You know, sometimes we talk about that is possibly part of our demise because we become so tribal, and therefore we say, hey, you know, you're not part of my tribe, and therefore, because you're not part of my group, then you must be the enemy. What's happening in Ukraine right now is a sort of a tribal catastrophe, right? And you can actually think in terms of that. It's a tribal conflict, although it's much more than that. I hope I'm not diminishing the profound effect of this war on people's lives in Ukraine and Russia and a lot of countries in Europe and the global community at large. But anyway, and the same thing can be said in terms of what you might call marital well-being. Every human being feels the need to belong to another person. I belong to my wife. My wife belongs to me. And there is an inherent, fundamental need to belong. I have to claim that I belong to another person. That is profound. And yes, it plays a very important role in explaining marital well-being. It explains, again, on the social front, it explains social conflict as well as social harmony within the group. Another theory is the attachment theory. Now, attachment theory dates back, way back in the 50s and 60s, when psychologists have been working, doing experiments with monkeys and finding out that baby monkeys, they would tend to explore their environment if they feel a sense of attachment. If they don't feel attached to their caretaker, then they become fearful, and they can't explore. And of course, I guess if you translate the monkey studies into human studies, their sense of family well-being, social well-being, become diminished as a function of lack of attachment. But if there is attachment, then I mean, if it's so simple. If you have a dog, and you're the caretaker of the dog, and you go out in the yard, and if the dog feels secure, emotionally secure, the dog is likely to wander off and explore the environment, right? But if the dog is not attached, the dog becomes very fearful, contracts in its own shell, so to speak. So attachment theory is explain the extent to which if we feel attached to a caretaker, as part of the family, then we feel much more secure and we come out of our own shell and we explore the environment, and that kind of exploration is likely to lead to providing us with positive outcomes, and those positive outcomes will generate into positive affect, leading to, again, a sense of positive social well-being or family well-being that ultimately spills over to life satisfaction. Yeah. Canoe said, are there any domains of well-being that are stronger than others, that they have more spillover effect? Okay, let me address this head on. When we talk about family life, work life, leisure life, social life, love life, spiritual life, educational life, on and on. There's so many lives and experiences that we have in those segmented in those different life domains. Some of those domains are likely to be more important than others. So let's say, for example, a person who is a drug addict. Let's say something a little bit more interesting. A person who is a sex addict. There you go, sex addict. Now, a sex addict is a person that places sex life as much more important than any other life domain, right? Because that person is addicted to sex. And therefore, the prominence, the importance of that domain takes precedence over every other domain. The same thing, a person was like, for example, a financial broker who made his life goal as making money and helping others make money. The financial domain, meaning economic or material domain, becomes most prominent. And therefore, all kinds of emotional experiences within that domain would take precedence over other domains. So the variance associated with the importance associated with the different life domains, and therefore the well-being experience in those life domains, and the spillover effect onto subjective well-being varies from one individual to another. They are not all equal by any means, by any stretch of the imagination. Canoe, you feel comfortable with that answer?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Another theory is related to the buffering effect of family. It's kind of interesting. You go on a job interview and, usually the human resource person that would interview would ask you, do you have a family? Says, why is that relevant? why are you asking me if I have a family, if I'm married or not, whether I have children or not? That is irrelevant. As a matter of fact, that in some cases it's illegal. You can't ask those questions. But rightly so, there is a reason for that. And the reason is related to the buffering effect of family. That means that when you encounter distress in life, when you become distressed, family becomes a cushion. Family becomes a buffer for stress. Yes, you bring your troubles to your wife or your husband. You bring your troubles to your family, and your family provides you comfort. It allows you, your family allows you to de-stress. So rightly, if an interviewer asks you about your family, they have something in mind, and that something in mind is, whether you are likely to persevere under duress in your job, because there are all kinds of stresses and strains at work, and whether you can persevere, and whether you have a family or not makes a difference in terms of your own perseverance and your own resilience in the workplace. So yes, indeed, family has a buffering effect, and therefore it plays a role in creating a sense of well-being, family well-being ultimately spilling over onto subjective well-being. Bottom-up spillover, well, we talked about this repeatedly and frequently, so we're not going to say anything about it. Horizontal spillover. Horizontal spillover is the effect of how family well-being will spill over on, work well-being and other life domain. Ultimately, if you have positive spillover between and among those different life domains, then your life satisfaction becomes positively impacted. Compensation, we talked about compensation. There are a lot of people, for example, who are very dissatisfied with their work life. They compensate by putting a lot more time, energy, and resources, their emotional energy, into family life. And therefore, they become happier in family, which makes a difference in terms of their overall life satisfaction. So yes, compensation theory explains, the dynamic, the domain dynamic that we talked about, and therefore it impacts life satisfaction and subjective well-being at large. Mattering theory. Now, there's quite a bit of research in social psychology, personality psychology, that says that if your social life matters, it's very important. Some people, especially when it comes to something, teenagers, youth, adolescents, when it comes to friends, this is the only thing that matters in life, right? For teenagers and adolescents, having friends is the only thing that matters. And therefore, friendship, all the trials and tribulations associated with friendships, and the extent to which friendships will cause pain and suffering, as well as joy and elation, right? That plays a very important role in social well-being and ultimately life satisfaction. So it depends on the extent to which, social aspects matter. Some people it matters, other people it don't matter. Take, for example, a person who is an intellectual. Intellectual life is most important than anything that is social. A lot of introverts, we talked about introversion versus extroversion, right? Introverts tend to have a much more developed intellectual life, and therefore what matters are things related to education, learning, intellect, right? Much more so than social aspects of life. Susan is saying, can you compare and contrast belonging versus need to matter? Their need, belong, the need belong is inherent in all of us. We're born that way. We're wired that way. It's part of our DNA as human beings, as Homo sapiens. Now, as far as need to matter, it varies from one individual to another. As I mentioned, for example, when it comes to teenagers, what matters is social life. Social life becomes so prominent in their frame of mind, and therefore it's an individual difference kind of thing. But need to belong, it's in all of us. I don't think it varies much, you know, between and among people. Susan, do you feel comfortable with that answer? Good, okay. Let's see. Let's move on to talk about the triangular theory. Oh, I'm running out of time. Okay, well, I guess we'll talk about the triangular theory, and then we'll leave it at that. Oh, we have health well-being and leisure well-being. Okay. We don't have enough time to talk about all these wonderful things. Yeah. I'm trying to refresh my memory about triangular theory of love. Okay, so yes, it's coming back to me. There are three major components. This pertains to marital well-being, meaning love life. So the extent to which you feel completed, you feel fulfilled, you feel a greater sense of marital well-being is dependent on three components, three factors. These are intimacy, passion, and commitment. Intimacy, passion, and commitment. So in order to feel a greater sense of marital well-being, you have to experience intimacy with another person. Intimacy is very important. But not only intimacy, but passion. You can be intimate with another person, but not experience passion. So we're talking about passion that involves, of course, you know, that involves physical intimacy, as in sex. That would translate in terms of passion. And then you've got the third dimension, which is commitment, meaning that if those people who experience high level of marital well-being, they also have to feel committed to each other. That means the sense of love that they express for each other has to be long-term, not short-term. Again, for those people who are familiar with the one-night stand kind of phenomena, right? It doesn't really add much to your love life. So that's the triangular theory of love. And then the passionate versus companionate love makes a distinction between passionate love as you know, couples that engage in marital affairs, in sex, lovemaking, versus companion, being together, intimate, but not necessarily being physically intimate per se. So they make a distinction between, and the idea is that, yes, marital well-being, love life, if it has these two components, that your partner is not only your partner, but is also your friend, your companion, right? That makes a difference. Okay, I think we have to adjourn. And I think I'm a few minutes over time, and I apologize for that. But we have 2 more chapters that we did not complete. That's health, well-being, and leisure well-being. I'm going to leave it up to you to do this on your own. Okay. I will see you next week. Have a great week. Bye now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
You're
night.
welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.